Thanks for joining promptly. Welcome everyone to the second webinar we're running under the Supply Wandsworth Business Support Program. If you were here last week, thanks for coming back. If you weren't, don't worry, you missed an interactive session, but I'll be giving you the link to the recording so you can catch up. And you'll learn something, of course, whether you were there last week or not. For those of you who were there last week, you'll know that I want you to get the most out of this next hour. So my thinking is that you should hopefully commit to do something as a result of what you hear this morning, and I'll ask you basically for what that plan of action is when we end up. It's an interactive session, and essentially if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll answer them as I go through, or alternatively we'll have a bit of time at the end. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, just a little bit about my background. Background is banking for my sins. Don't hold it against me. Of course, I was one of the good guys. But on a serious note, my bidding and tendering experience comes from 4 years of managing the local and central government business for Lloyds. And that involved a lot of complex tendering, both renewals and new tender responses. I'm an advisor with Brandywin. I'll tell you a little bit about that and about them in a moment. And I've worked on a number of these programs, and as you can see from the slide, across a various number of different boroughs. I've got my own business as well, and I've also got a little social care business, which is good for my heart. So I do some good for old people, and I keep my brain ticking by doing these sort of sessions. So that's 40 years summarized in about a minute. So time is clearly flying. Okay, just a very little bit about Brandywin for those of you who weren't here last week. As it says, we're a group of leading business advisors operating in London and the South East. And what we think is different about us is that we run, all of us, our own individual businesses. And we're not just theorists, we also run our businesses. So we face the challenges that you faced as well. And as you can see, we work with local authorities, business growth hubs, Chamber of Commerce's, delivering these sort of business support programs. And we work with entrepreneurs, business owners like yourself, right from startup through to larger growing businesses. So whatever your problem, hopefully we've got someone who can help you. So, as it says on the slide, these are interactive sessions. I'm a firm believer that what you put into life, you get more out of. So do get involved in the exercises. And as I said, it's a follow-on from the session I ran last week, and it's all about improving your bid response. As it says, it's all based around the principles of best practice. The things I will share with you today come from feedback that I've had when talking to businesses, so it's real, it's not just pulled off the internet, and this is real feedback from businesses just like you. And like I mentioned last week, whenever you're submitting a tender, it's a selling exercise. You're selling yourself, you're selling your product. Some businesses do consider and treat it like an administrative exercise. There may be some admin involved, but if you treat it purely as an admin exercise, you're unlikely to succeed. Quite a lot to cover. Some of the things we talked about last week. So basically, we talked about why organizations go to tender, what they look for, things about getting the basics right. That's making the first cut, because that's what you're always doing in a tender process. You're trying to get yourself and your business through to the next cut of businesses. I started introducing a few concepts to you in terms of the golden rules, and we'll look at understanding questions and objectives, confirming your solution, the selling points, how you articulate benefits, how you prove that what you're saying is true, i.e. evidence, the sources you can find information about the client, researching, and finally, writing a clear and concise, compelling bid response. So quite a lot to get through, some of which we got through last week, and I'll just also give you a little reminder on that. So the program, it's a condensed program, quite short, but quite beneficial. There's lots of good stuff in there, and will help you engage with procurement departments. Because like I mentioned last week, when you're dealing with local authorities in particular, and larger tier 1 organizations, you'll often be dealing with a procurement department. So you won't be dealing with the end user of the service or product who is buying from you. So we'll show you what they look for and how they evaluate tender bids. There's also an online bid capability assessment questionnaire. I'd encourage you to try and complete that. It doesn't take too long. I'll give you the link later on in the presentation. And it allows us to assess at what stage you are in terms of your bidding and tendering process, and perhaps where the gaps are and where you need to sort of fill in, whether it might be getting policies in place or getting case studies. So I would encourage you to do that, and we will produce a report which will help you improve your bid responses. Of course, we'll improve and help you with your bidding skills, and that's what these webinars are all about. And as I've just said, always treat it as a sales process. We're also running a Meet the Buyer session, which I'll talk to you a bit later in the presentation. That's in November at Tooting Works, where we have a launch event, and they're really good events to get you in front of key people that you might not otherwise have access to. And finally, in terms of phase 2 of the program, which is coming hopefully early next year, you'll be eligible for what are called individual tender advice sessions. So you'll have time with a specialist like myself to go through your challenges in terms of bidding and tendering in a bit more detail. So there's lots and lots of good stuff in the program, and what we ask from you is give us your time. So like I said, for those of you who missed the session last week, the recording of the session is on our YouTube channel. The link is up there, and you'll be able to get that from Gregory. And even if you've attended last week and you want to review, refresh what we talked about, then you can have access to that. And this session is also being recorded, so you can go back and look at the sort of things that we've talked about and think about the areas that you might need to focus. So it's a great program. Of course, I would say that, but it is. And there are some of the benefits you'll get from the program. Of course, I'm not going to go through every single one, but essentially, we will look at your bid writing skills, and we'll give you tips, techniques, ideas, and share best practice standards to help you to basically improve your tender responses. There's the Meet the Buyer sessions I've talked about. There's the one-to-one sessions, hopefully coming next year. And also, we'll help you get to a point where you can submit what's called an expression of interest. Expressions of interest are essentially a document you complete, send to the council to show you're interested in bidding for a piece of business. We'll support you throughout the process. We don't just sort of give you these webinars and then say, good luck, all the best. We'll help you out throughout the process. And additionally, we'll help you complete what's called a tender business model canvas. Some of you may have come across this. It's a business management tool, which is very effective. And essentially, it's a way of analyzing your business succinctly on one page of paper, one piece of paper. So we'll look at that from the perspective of tendering. We'll also talk about your value proposition. That's something that a term you may have come across. What value are you adding, and how can you make that more compelling for procurement departments? And like I said, we'll engage you throughout the program and give you regular and ongoing feedback. So there's quite a lot of good stuff there for you to get your teeth into, even though it's condensed into a fairly short time frame. Okay, so I'm just going to do a very quick reminder where I won't be well on this too long in terms of what we covered last week as a reminder, or if you didn't manage to attend, just to give you an idea of the sort of things we covered. So we talked initially and looked at why organizations go to tender, because there's a lot of time and effort on all sides. And we covered things like allowing the buyer to make a fair and objective comparison, and hopefully, by asking consistent questions, minimize supplier selection risk. I touched upon the fact that they're always looking for a sustainably competitive price. And that's not necessarily the lowest price, but it's a competitive price. So you need to know your market. You need to know basically your competitive pricing. We looked at things like delivering efficiencies. How are you going to improve a process? Can you save them time? Can you basically help management improve the process? And preferably, can you measure those benefits? And in terms of what they look for, we looked at things like your level of competence. Can you actually deliver what it is you say? It's all well and good saying you can do something, but how do you prove it? And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And things like finding a cultural fit. People like to work with people who have a similar sort of mindset and similar view of the world. And then also having an open communication process and taking accountability when things go wrong. I talked about getting the basics right. That's the first stage of any tender process. And yes, that is an administrative process to an extent, and there'll be some form filling, but you have to fill that out properly completely and fully, because otherwise you could trip up and not make it through to the next cut. I touched upon terminology, and you may see all sorts of different terminology, from invitation to tender to request for information, pre-qualification questionnaire, and just making sure that you're clear which part of the process that you're actually completing the forms for. So it might sound, as it says, basic, but it's important. It's important. Touched upon having the right policies in place, because with any tender, particularly with the councils and the local authorities, you need to have a certain number of policies in place. And I explained that you don't need to wait for the tender to come out to get those policies in place. Plan in advance. Have your social value policy in place. Make sure you've got a contingency plan or a health and safety policy. As long as you know what's required, you can get that information up front. And then I talked about the importance of planning. Tendering does take time. There's no question about that. But my view of it is, if you're going to do it properly and do it well. So plan the process. Make sure you've got a template as to who's doing what by when, and make sure you always work to that one day before the deadline, because invariably you run out of time. So planning is critical. I started talking to you about golden rules. I'll touch more about that in a moment. We looked at understanding questions and objectives, making sure you fully understand them to allow the evaluators to score you highly. We looked at not just what you're being asked for now in the tender, but what are the wider organisational objectives? What's their strategy? Where can you find it? And then we looked at research. There is a whole host of information out there, and you just need to go and find it. But the more you know about your clients in advance, the better it is. So we looked at what to look for, where to find it, different sources, things like obviously social media, LinkedIn. We looked at building relationships as well in advance, because all these things would help you stand out from the competition. And that's what you're always trying to do, is be better than the rest. That's a quick summary of what we touched upon in our first session. As I said, the recording is online if you want to go into greater detail. But let's move on. So I started introducing what I called golden rules and what constitutes a winning bid. And it's a combination of the right price, as I said, not the cheapest price, and then what I'm calling golden rules. So we look at things like directly answering the question according to the evaluation criteria. And we looked at how evaluators score and the ways for you to get higher marks when you submit your tenders. We'll look at basically the understanding of broader needs and objectives. What's their strategy in 12, 18, 24 months, as opposed to just now? So, how can you become a strategic partner, for example? Is your solution credible, competent? Does it sound like you can actually deliver what it is you say you can do? Because it's all well and good saying it, but can you prove that you can deliver it? We'll talk about benefits. What value are you adding to the client? And that's always the way you should articulate things in your bid responses. It's very tempting just to tell them what you do, but we'll talk about benefits in greater detail later in this session. And then how can you make what you say believable? How can you help the client and prove to the client you can do what you say? So we talk about evidence, and we'll touch upon that in some detail in this session shortly. And then finally, we'll look at writing in a clean, clear, precise style. And essentially, we're going to cover those 4 areas this morning. The other 2 areas we covered last week. So quite a bit to get through, but don't worry, it's going to be fun. Okay, so first golden rule. Here's my analogy. If you're going to climb a mountain, you wouldn't wake up one morning and look out the window and think, oh, the weather looks okay. It's a good day to climb the mountain. Let's go. You'd do some research, wouldn't you? You'd think about what sort of equipment do you need. You might look at basically what are the different routes to get up the mountain. You might look at, of course, you would look at the weather conditions, what training you need, who's done it before, what challenges did they face, how can you do it better, what level of skill, what's the right approach. Because by going through that thought process, and I'm using the analogy of the mountain, but of course, I'm talking about tenders, of course, it allows you to meet your objective. So use that thinking process when you're completing your tender response. And the challenge is for you to explain that clearly and concisely to the client. Because if you can do that, you're going to be on the road to success. So let's go through this slide now, because it's all about how. It's about, as I say, demonstrating your thought process, your approach, and answering that overarching question about how. And like it says, include what's relevant and use common sense. Don't overcomplicate things. So how are you going to deliver your solution? And how can you substantiate that it's something that you can do? So think about things like, who's going to deliver the service, the product? Is it you? Do you have a partner? Do you subcontract things? If it's a large project, for example, do people have to be specified and given particular roles? Use names if possible, use pictures. It just makes it a bit more real. And also, if it's a complicated process, who's going to own parts of the process? And be specific. What's your approach? What steps will you take to get the job done? What are your processes in place? What are you going to deliver? Do you need some particular materials? Do you need equipment? Do you need tools if it's a technical type of product? Do you have an SLA? That's what's called a service level agreement, where essentially you can demonstrate or do things by a certain standard. And like I said earlier about planning, make sure you've got some milestones in terms of when you're going to deliver certain elements of the project. So have a schedule, have a simple Excel spreadsheet, but make sure you've got a system to demonstrate to the client that you know what needs to be done by who and when. So have dates, have deliverable timings on your planning schedule, because that all helps give the client confidence that you can deliver what you say. Where are you going to deliver the service, the product? Is it at the client's office? Are there off-site facilities? Is it at team members' facilities? If it's a larger client, do they have different geographic locations? If so, maybe you need to put a visual map in place to show who's going to cover different sites for the client. There's lots and lots of different ways that you can actually demonstrate that you thought this through carefully. And ultimately, you have to answer the question, why? What's your rationale for the process and the option you've chosen? And what other approaches and options did you perhaps consider and discount? And can you back that up with evidence and link it to benefits in terms of the value you will add to clients? So quite a complicated slide with a lot of things to think about. But like everything with tendering, if you go through the thorough planning process and make sure you tick off all these options, you're more likely to succeed. So like I said, if you're going to do it well. Right, let's talk about USP. I'm sure you're familiar with it, unique selling proposition. What makes you different? What makes you stand out? Because unique is a word that's used too commonly, too casually. People talk about it being fairly unique or partially unique, but it can't be. It's either unique or it's not. And as you can see from the definition, it says, of which there's only one, unmatched, unequal, having no like, equal, or parallel. So it is unique. Maybe you'll be surprised, maybe you won't be surprised. The number of businesses that I talk to, when I'm chatting to them and we're talking about USP, I say to them, what's your USP as a business? What's different about you? How do you stand out? And it's amazing how many say we provide good customer service or we provide great customer service. Well, I'm sorry, people, that is not a USP, because I've never spoken to a business and asked that question and they've said, we provide poor customer service. It's too general. I mentioned this last time, but it's an excellent example of USP. A client I was dealing with about a year or so ago, he's basically got more 5-star Google reviews than any of his competitors. But that does stand him out. That's something that is unique about him and his business. So as it's difficult to be totally unique, a way of overcoming that is being innovative in terms of the way you approach a standard procedure. So what I mean by that, going back to my banking days a long time ago, we used to have an objective to answer the phone in 3 rings. You might have process that says you'll get back and answer phone calls within an hour or on the same day. And so basically, if you can't be truly unique, you can differentiate yourself. And these are what are called positive discriminators by being innovative in the way you undertake a standard approach. And that's all about being better than your competition. And it's key in terms of standing out from the rest. So, like I say, being totally unique or is challenging, but with the innovative standard procedures, there's a way of overcoming that. But so what? You've got to pass, your proposition has to pass what we call the so what test. Not very technical, but it's true. How are you actually going to make things better for the client? Are you going to save them time? Are you going to reduce costs? Are you going to improve a process? You've got to talk about benefits whenever you are talking about things that you can do in your tender response. You've got to link it to how it helps the client. So I've been doing quite a lot of talking, so I'm going to let you do a little bit of work now. I hope you're going to join in. So first exercise is just have a think, and in the chat, put down what benefits does your solution have, and how would you link it to the client? So basically, always explain what you do and link it to a benefit with the phrase, which means that. And can you actually explain the value you will add? So you might say something like, we've worked on a similar contract, which means that we've learned and adapted our solution, make it more cost effective for you. So I'm going to give you a moment or so. I know it's always nervous about who's going to go first, but don't worry. Put some information in the chat in terms of what are the benefits of your solution and can you demonstrate how you add value. And like I always said last time, I know this is not necessarily easy, but by thinking it through carefully, it'll then help you when you're actually doing your tender responses, because you'll have thought through these things and you'll be able to articulate more clearly what benefits there are in terms of your solution. So I'll give you a minute for that. Don't be shy, just pop it in the chat. Someone's going to start, I'm sure. Don't be shy, people. Someone put something in the chat to get us going. It's not like a classroom where I can look over you, but like I said at the outset, the more you put into these things, the more you're going to get out. So don't be shy. Pop something in the chat, and it will help other people understand the thinking and the challenges that we're all going through in terms of demonstrating value. And of course, if you can demonstrate that your benefits and your value add is measurable, even more powerful, even more powerful. Right, I'll give it 30 seconds. Obviously, everyone's either thinking about it very hard or they're not too sure what to put. But if you can't do that now, when you go back, oh, excellent, someone started. Thank you so much. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Okay, yep. So basically, Toby said we offer a broader social impact beyond the specific project. And that's an excellent example, because what you'll also find, particularly with councils, is there's always a social value element. They'll always expect you to have a social value policy. And that's quite simply a way of demonstrating that you, as a business owner, are adding something to the borough. You're giving something back. You're doing something that benefits the growth of the borough. It could be anything from providing training to young people to, I heard of a painter and decorator who said he would paint the local community centre. So that's an excellent example, Toby. Thanks for that. That's much appreciated. Okay, well, we'll move on, but thank you for that, Toby, and everyone else. Don't be shy in terms of participating. So let's look at some of the benefits. These are generic benefits, but they're important, and hopefully it will help you with your thinking and your solutions and your products in terms of how you can articulate benefits. So like I've demonstrated and explained earlier, does your solution save management time? We know you're all busy, management are busy, so if you can show and demonstrate a way you can save them time, it's measurable, big tick in the box, higher score from the evaluators. On the flip side, can you demonstrate a way of reducing costs? Can you improve things like staff morale? That's quite That's very important, even more so these days with the balance between home working and, working back in the office. You need to keep your staff happy. Financially, can you show them a way that you're going to increase turnover, improve their margins, drive up productivity? And then there's things about waste. Can you find a way of reducing waste? This is all about being environmentally friendly. I'm sure you're aware of it. We'll touch upon that in the session next week. Can you find a way of reducing staff turnover, improving quality levels, skills levels? These are all generic benefits. So think about your own business and how you can articulate those benefits. And like it says there, try and attack something else. And what I mean by that is a way of measuring and quantifying the value you add. Because if you can do that, it's just so much more powerful than just saying, yeah, we can help you reduce staff turnover. Fantastic. How are you going to do that? By how much you're going to reduce the staff turnover? What's your process? How are you going to measure it? If you can do that, you'll be scoring much more highly with the evaluators. So, to recap where we've come so far with our tender response, we've understood the requirements. Okay, this is going back to the first session as well. We've read the questions properly. We've done some research on the client. We've started to engage. We've spoken to the client, and we've started to explain how we'll meet their needs. We're looking at benefits, hopefully, and explained how we can add value. And the question is now, how do you make your story more believable? And quite simply, it's all about evidence. Because probably like me, people buy what they believe in. So providing evidence is critical to your argument. We all know there's lots of stuff on social media, for example, in terms of if I'm going to a hotel, I go straight onto TripAdvisor and I look at basically what people are saying about it. And I think, okay, they're saying things are good. So, the more evidence you can provide, the better. It's just like a court case. You've got the defense, you've got the prosecution, they're presenting their evidence, and the jury have to decide which to believe. And it's not dissimilar in bidding and tendering in terms of the principle. There are lots of suppliers potentially presenting their cases, and the evaluators are looking at each case according to the evaluation criteria and the evidence and thinking, which one do I really believe? Which one's the strongest? Which ones show me how they can measure and demonstrate tangible added value? So evidence is critical. So let's spend a little bit of time on that. But firstly, everyone loves a good story, right? So the question I have for you guys and girls to think about is, if you were asked, what would your clients say about you? So think about that for a moment. And while you're doing that, even more importantly, what would you want them to say about you? Hopefully it's the same thing. While you're thinking about that just for a moment, you don't just put anything in chat, but just think about it. The example I give you is I've got a friend, an ex-colleague, was a banker. Now he's moved in. He's a handyman. So you think, well, it's a fairly generic service. But what he does, what people say about him is he's reliable. He turns up on time. He answers your phone call. He comes up with new ideas. People love him because he does a good job and he helps clients. So think about it from the perspective of your own business. What would you want your clients to say about you if they're asked, what's ABC Limited like? What are they like to deal with? Do they provide good service? What are their solutions? Do they help you increase your productivity? So think about that in terms of your own business, perhaps outside the session. So let's have a look at an exercise on evidence and making your story more believable. So the question is, how do you make what you say more believable? What can you put in your bid to strengthen your case and back up what you're saying? So again, same story. If you can put something in the chat, that would be excellent. I'll give you a moment to do that. So there are no trick questions here. It's just like, what do you use to back up what you're saying? When you say you can deliver these things and you can do a great job at X, Y, Z, how are you going to make it believable? Let's have a look and see what's coming up. Yeah, evidence. Yeah, evidence. Canaz, that's right. But what sort of evidence? Yeah, Toby, bang on. Yeah, customer feedback, case studies. That's excellent. What else can we put in there to back up what we say? Make them believe that what we're saying is true. Yeah, testimonials, absolutely fantastic. That's good stuff. Because we all know it's much, much more powerful if your clients say how good you are rather than you saying how good you are. So, while you're thinking about, one of the things with branding, which we're pretty good at, is that we've done a lot of projects for councils, chambers of commerce, and generally, in fact, almost exclusively, they all say good things about what we've done. So that backs up that we're able to deliver these sort of projects, that we're able to add value and demonstrate how. Yeah, that's a brilliant one, Toby. You got gold star, Toby. Experience of delivering similar projects. That is top notch. If you can do that, you're a long way towards scoring highly. And for those of you who went to the launch session a couple of weeks ago, I think Mark Glaister, the head of procurement, he actually stood up and said they ask Wandsworth Council, they ask for evidence of exactly what you said, Toby, which is basically, have you got any evidence and proof of working on a similar project? Because if you have and you've done it well, great, you're one step ahead of the rest. Okay, good stuff. That's excellent. Thank you for your participation on that. So let me talk you through some of the things you've touched upon and the different types of evidence which you can use to back up and make your case stronger. So the strongest form of evidence is what we call objective evidence. So it's independent, and it's things like, accreditations. You might have a strong audit. There might have been some market surveys done on your business, and testimonials, someone mentioned, strong references. And you may have won some awards, for example. You may have had press articles written about how good you are. And you may offer site visits. If you're really, really confident, you may even offer financial guarantees. So all this evidence, you might have things like an ISO 9001 accreditation. So all these forms of independent, objective evidence make your case stronger if you have got that. So think about those things. Then you've got what's called like business evidence. Again, we've touched upon some of those things, case studies that you developed yourself. You may have some operating procedures that you've got in place. Things like having a project methodology that you can demonstrate. That's really quite important. Because if you can show that you've got someone who has undertaken or you've undertaken projects like this before, and you've got a system, you've got a process, you're Prince 2 qualified. Prince 2 is a standard project management qualification. Then that counts for a lot. That shows the client that not only have you got the product, hopefully, or the service, but you've got a way of implementing it in an efficient manner. So that's quite powerful. And then you've got what's called company evidence. These are statements that you produce perhaps yourself. They're statements which are saying you can trust us. So, you might have given your opinion on something going on in your industry. You'll have your own marketing information. You may have various policies in place. Like I said, that all helps the evaluators understand a bit more about how organized you are as a business, that you've got systems, that you've got processes. And yes, it is created by you, but it's still much better than not having anything. You may have CVs or bios on key people within the business. Having a picture always helps. It just makes it a little bit more real. So all these things that are produced by you, whilst not as strong as the independent objective evidence, they are still powerful in terms of backing up your case. And then you'll have perhaps what's called sector evidence. This is weaker. It's non-exclusive because others can also rely on the same sort of evidence. There may be some standard procedures within the industry you operate. You may have some standard service approaches. We touched upon SLAs. There may be like a service agreement standards that you have within your industry. So again, a weaker form of evidence, but nevertheless still something that adds weight to your case rather than having nothing. And then finally, you've got what's called operational or incumbent evidence. And what I mean by that is you've got the contract already, okay, and it's coming up for renewal. You should have, as the existing supplier, lots of ammunition, lots of data, which you've hopefully collected and used across the term of the contract. You can demonstrate, how you implemented your solution. You'll hopefully have some data and some stats on performance, what you've done well. Have you produced reports for the client to show what's been happening in terms of the deliverables? How have you helped the end users? What other stakeholders have been involved? Can you demonstrate throughout the contract how you've added value. Have you come up with some innovative solutions? And what's the impact been on the customer and their organization? Like I said earlier, there are always issues, there are always challenges that come up in business. This is the real world. How do you deal with them? How did you resolve them? Did you take accountability? And then finally, throughout the contract, hopefully you've collected some positive quotes and recommendations from stakeholders. So you've got, hopefully, as the existing provider, a stronger position. And I certainly hear sometimes businesses saying, well, the existing provider is always going to get the renewal contract. It's not true. Although the existing provider, if they've done a good job, would usually be in a slightly stronger position for the reasons we've talked about there. So there's lots and lots of different types of evidence, and collect that during the term of the contract to strengthen your case when renewal comes up. Let's just look at some of the rules of evidence. So first of all, it's got to be relevant. It's got to be relevant to the bid, the client, the market, the service. Local authorities, they all talk to each other. They all go to similar forums, meetings, and they share information. And guess what? Like Toby said earlier, if you've done a good job with another council, guess what? Get yourself a case study, get a testimonial, and it'll put you in a much stronger position when you're bidding for new contracts. It should be recent. I use the example of TripAdvisor when I go abroad, but on anything, if I'm buying anything from anyone or business, I go online and I look at the reviews, whether they're Google reviews or they're testimonials. And if, for example, there are, say, lots of reviews and they're all 6 to 12 months old, I'll immediately think, that doesn't sound right. Why is that the case? Whereas if they're all current, and you don't need hundreds of these things, as long as you've got a number of recent ones, so build that into your process, get maybe one a month or something like that. That adds weight. That makes it much stronger. And like it says, spend time developing that evidence as you go through your business, building up case studies. Include all these things in your planning process, because you don't need to wait for the tender to be issued in the market and then think, well, we better get some case studies, you better get some testimonials. You can do that as you go through your daily business activity. So build these things into your process. Yeah, Kanaz has asked, what advice do you have for a new business just starting? That's a good question, Kanaz, and it's difficult. And of course, if you don't have case studies, you don't have evidence, you need to build that up over time. The other option is to perhaps partner with an existing supplier who can help get you in with the council, with the client, and you just have to start building your relationship. It is difficult. It is more difficult with a brand new business. I accept that, but the council will have certain criteria in terms of size and turnover, and you need to work towards meeting that over time. We can talk about it separately, Kanaz, if you want to, offline. But it is more difficult for a new startup. I acknowledge that, but not impossible. Not impossible. Right, okay, let's move on. 1 second. 1 second. The next golden rule I want to talk to you about is writing styles. As it says there, less is more. And there's a skill in doing this. And what I'll show you in the next few slides in terms of writing styles can be used in any written communication. And it can be a differentiator. So I've just got one more question in the chat before I move on. I'll just double check what's going on there. Yep, happy to chat offline, Ken. There's no problem at all. Okay, so in terms of writing styles, the evaluators, the people who are evaluating the tender responses, you could be dealing with a business you've never met. And these evaluators, it's not necessarily their full-time jobs. So they won't work too hard to find the information or be persuaded what you're saying is true. So the point I'm making there is make their life as easy as possible. Don't distract them. Don't waste their time. Don't think, let's just put everything we think might be relevant into our tender response and some of it will be relevant and that'll be great because we won't have missed anything. That will not help. You need to basically be specific. And like I said earlier, everything you put in the tender response needs to relate back to the bid and what the client's asking. So be concise. Don't distract them with too much unnecessary information. So like it says, it's important to use precise and clear language. And here are 6 rules for writers. You can Google this separately after because it's a little bit, I won't say technical, but anyway, I'll go through it as quickly as I can within reason. So don't use metaphors, similes, or other sort of figures of speech you've seen in print, like it's raining cats and dogs, heart of gold. One thing someone said to me very early on in my banking career is write the way you speak. When you're talking, you generally use more simple, plain language. But I see people then when they're writing, overcomplicating things, using words that you think you never say that. So like it says, never use long words when a short one will do. Keep it simple. So here's an example. You could say, or you should say, we will show you how our proposed solution will reduce costs by 10%, rather than something like, our leading edge methodology and option analysis will demonstrate increased efficiencies across your processes. No, what on earth does that mean? be clear, keep it simple. And often with contracts and tenders in the public sector, you'll be restricted in terms of word count. So you may be familiar with this, and it will say in a certain section, maximum words 300, 400, 500. So using this approach to be concise and precise can be useful in those situations as well. And then, like it says, never use passive where you can use active in terms of the way you speak. I'll give you an example of that. And of course, with every example, there's an exception. And don't use foreign phrases, don't use technical jargon. Like it says, use everyday English and write as you speak. The example I give you there is my son, he's a mechanical engineer, he's pretty technical. If you were talking to him, for example, about cars and engines, you'd have to use a very different language to the sort of language you'd use if you were talking to me, because I wouldn't get it beyond the fact that its color is this and its engine size is that and it costs that. So what I'm saying is that target and select your language to make it easier for the audience and for the evaluators. So let me give you a little example about this active versus passive writing. So generally, as it says, that never use passive when you can use active. I'll give you the exception as well. So passive would be Oliver Twist was written by Charles Dickens, 7 words. But active is more punchy. Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. Simple example, but again, less words, more punchy. But of course, like I said, there's always an exception to the rule, and here it is. Here the passive is the opera singer was heckled by an onlooker in the crowd. That's passive, whereas active is an onlooker in the crowd heckled the opera singer. The reason why the passive is acceptable is because the opera singer is the main focus in this case. So passive can be acceptable, but generally use active, not passive. Avoid jargon. Hyperboles, not hyperboles, as it printed. And hyperboles are basically exaggerated statements. Things like, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Don't use business jargon. I was in the corporate world for 30 odd years, and it sort of became part of our way of speaking. But now, since I've left it for over 10 years, and I see certain corporate speak, I think, what are you saying? Blue sky thinking outside the box. Just keep it simple. Keep it clear and honest, and write in clear English, not in Americanisms. And avoid like random capitals. I mean, that tends to distract. It looks a bit messy. It doesn't really, it's sort of like shouting at you. So I've seen that in tender responses, and it doesn't really work. So try not to use capitals to make a point. And be positive. Rather than saying things like, we would, we can, we could, we propose to, be positive, right? We will. It's much more positive. And the other error that I often see is using plurals when referring to a company or organization. So what you should say in this case is Branduin is running this webinar, this workshop, as opposed to Branduin are running the workshop. So lots of little tips and techniques. I don't necessarily expect you to remember all of those now, but like I say, the recordings of the webinar will be available, and you can have a look at that. But if you adopt these styles, it will definitely help you stand out and write a clearer, concise bid. But let's have a little go at an exercise here. If you have a look at what's on the screen, basically, it's quite wordy. Have a quick read of it. It says rewrite the passage. I don't think we've got time to do that. But what I'd like you to do is just give some thought to the words in that box section, which are the ones that are necessary and the ones that are superfluous. So have a little think about that for literally 30 seconds, and then I'll just go through it and explain what I mean in terms of writing clearly and concisely versus what's in that box. So that was what it was in its original form. And essentially, the words in red, they're the ones that are key, that need to stay. All the others are fluff. They're unnecessary. So 61 words in the original. And guess what? If you can concise that down, reduce and take out all the fluff, then you got it down to literally less than half the number of words. And like I say, that can help you in terms of word count restrictions in tender responses. The example I give you of that, again, going back to my banking days, we used to have relationships with some rather large organizations as a bank, and occasionally the two chief executives would get together for a meeting. And one of my roles was to produce like a one-page executive brief summarizing the relationship we had with the company or the organization. And we had files as tall as me. I'm not that tall, but you get the message, basically. There were a lot of files. So condensing that down into something similar, something much more lean and clean is a skill, and it will differentiate you from the competition. So let's just look at some examples. Again, I won't go through them all, but you've got the long version down the column on the left in red, and then you've got a shorter version, a much simpler version on the right. So conduct an investigation into. Investigate, all pretty simple. During the time that while has an ability to, can. I'm not going to read them all out. It's not rocket science. But you can see some people, when they're writing, they seem to write in a longer version, and it doesn't help. Keep it more punchy, keep it short, keep it concise. Here are just a few more examples. Again, I won't go through them all, but as an added bonus, well, a bonus is something that's added, isn't it? After careful scrutiny, that's what I like. And if you look up scrutiny in the dictionary, it's basically something you carefully look at, or we will entirely eliminate. What's the definition of eliminate? Get rid of something completely. Another one I like is mostly foreign imports. Well, as far as I'm aware, all imports are foreign. You can't import from your own country. So there are a number of superfluous words that often people will put into tenders because they think it sounds, I don't know what they do, but the point I'm making is keep it simple, keep it punchy, keep it concise. And that will definitely differentiate you from the competition, as it says there. If you can do that, you will stand out from the competitors, and also you'll create a better impression with the evaluators. Because if you do have a very long, wordy bid, often what the evaluators will do, they'll start to read it and then they'll just lose time. They'll lose the patience and they'll just move on to the next question or the next bid. So it is a clear skill and differentiator to write in those lean, clean, shorter terms. Okay, so to summarize, what we've looked at across the two workshops, the two webinars, we've complied with the instructions. We've read the requirements carefully, and we've answered the questions fully. We've looked at that question about why you. How are you demonstrating that you stand out from the crowd? What's the reason for the client to pick you? You focused on the client. It's so tempting for businesses to revert to, look at all the great things we do as a business. We'll tell you everything and some of it will stick. No, please don't do that. It's about the client. It's all about them. You've explained your approach. You've demonstrated you've got a methodology to deliver what you say. You've explained clearly what the benefits are. You've also had the document independently reviewed, the key point we touched upon in the first session. Not just for errors, but just to make sure it flows. And it's well written, and you've got a high quality, succinct document you've written in that concise style. You've written in accordance with the evaluation criteria, so you've made it easier for the evaluators to look at and score your bid. We touched upon that in the first session. How do you find ways to give the evaluators the chance to score you the best? And then finally, you've given them the evidence to back up what you say, whether it's case studies, testimonials, third-party sort of reviews. And if you can do all those things, I assure you, you will be well on the way to a successful bid. But like I said, it takes a bit of time and effort. But if you're going to do it properly. And the final golden rule may be politically incorrect, but it's not the taking part. It's winning that matters. So bid to win, because there's no prizes for second place. So if you follow the things we've talked about in these 2 sessions, you're going to give yourself a much, much greater chance of being successful. Okay, well, we're well on time and we've got a few more slides to cover, so thanks for staying with us. I wanted to just touch upon where do you find all these opportunities, particularly with the council, with Wandsworth. And like it says, you can see there, nearly 90% of contracts were openly available across London in terms of tendering. So they're not all going to their friends and their mates, as what contrary to what some people sometimes believe. And you can also see that with certain contract sizes, once you've built up a relationship with a council, or you might be on what's called a framework agreement, below a certain size, the commissioning officer, they can just select a number of suppliers to invite to bid. So they might just pick 3 or 4. Or if they're even smaller contracts, they may not have to go through a formal invitation to tender process. But all councils have, including Wandsworth, a strategy, a policy to try and drive more of their business and increase their supply chain with local businesses like yourself. So the main website, the main sort of portal that Wandsworth uses is Delta Resourcing. So if you've never heard of that or never seen it, just go and have a look, perhaps get yourself registered on it, and you'll see the sort of things that are coming up for tender. For those of you who are at the session, the launch session a couple of weeks ago, Mark, the head of procurement, he put up some extracts from the Wandsworth website, which has some really helpful information about how to sell to the council, what they're looking for. And it even had, basically, as you may or may not remember, an Excel spreadsheet with every single contract that the council has in place, who the supplier is, when it expires, the value of the contract. So by having that information, and this all goes back to research, you can start thinking about what are the sort of contracts and tenders that my business could apply for to tender. You don't have to wait for the tender to come out. Get ahead of the curve. Start seeing what's coming up in 6-12 months and do your planning. Get your case studies. Start talking to the key people within the council. Come to the Meet the Buyer event. They'll all be there. So there's lots of useful links there, which will also hopefully help you to see where the tenders are advertised and also the sort of things that the council are looking for when they are evaluating tender responses. Right, well, just a little summary of what we're up to on the programme. As you can see there, we're on the Improve Your Bid webinar at the moment. Like I said, the recordings are there for ones you haven't seen before. Next week, same place, same time, I'll be doing a webinar on public sector bidding and tendering. A lot of the things, most of the things we've covered today and last week are relevant for public sector bidding, but public sector bids and tenders and the process is a little bit more involved. Call it involved, administrative, cumbersome, structured, choose whichever word you like. But there's a process, there are rules. And as long as you know what those rules are and how to make sure you meet them, public sector bidding and tendering isn't that complicated. So if you're seriously contemplating trying to work with Wandsworth Council, then that's a webinar you should attend. And the last one we're doing on the 24th, that's a colleague of mine, Tony. He's basically going to be talking about what's called the circular economy. You may have come across this term. It is a key approach for SMEs, and it's all about tackling global challenges. And you know, as an SME, you think, I haven't got time for all that sort of stuff. But it's things like climate change. It's about waste management, being more sustainable, recycling, plastic reduction, better use of resources, and also the question I think Ken, as you asked about new businesses, we'll also talk to you about developing key partnerships. So, for example, if you look at a tender and you think, well, we could do some of that, but we couldn't do all of it, how do we sort of tie in with an existing supplier and get involved in the process? Then that's a good one to attend in terms of understanding how that process works. So the Eventbrite link is at the bottom. Please do come along next week and on the 24th. There's lots of good stuff in there. If for any reason you can't, as I said, the recordings are all on our YouTube channel. That's the bid capability assessment questionnaire I mentioned earlier. The links there, do complete that, and then we'll produce a report basically summarizing where you are in terms of your state of preparedness for bidding. So a worthwhile 15 minutes or so of your time. Okay, so just checking the chat for a moment. And then finally, I talked about this Meet the Buyer event that we're holding at Tooting Works on the 14th of November. We've done a lot of these events with a number of different councils where we've run similar programs, and they're good events because you've got the key decision makers, the key procurement people from the council there, and these are the sort of people, and from the private sector, these are the sort of people that it's often quite difficult to get hold of on the phone or by email. So you'll get access to key people. And of course, like I talked about last week, ultimately, whether it's a council or it's a smaller business, people buy from people that they know, like, and trust. If you met them, you've got to develop a relationship. You can follow it up after with an email. Once you've met someone, it's easier to have a chat with them. Do get yourself registered on that. Those events are typically very, very useful and productive. It's not just the council, we'll have also people from the private sector. And just to finally summarize, that's just some feedback, lots of words on the slide, apologies for that. But essentially, this is all about the program and basically the one-to-ones that we run. You don't need to read that, I didn't expect you to, but what it says in a nutshell is that the program is helpful, one-to-ones are useful. And so, like I said earlier, always more powerful to have clients saying, hopefully, what a good job you've done, rather than me trying to tell you that. There's our evidence, if you like, our proof. And finally, a slide will be familiar to those of you who were last week. If you want to get on the skills webinars, there's the link on Eventbrite. Get yourself set up on that. If you want to participate in the Meet the Buyer events, get in touch with Gregory at the council. And then ultimately, as I said, it's all about trying to help you submit successful expressions of interest and develop a winning bid. So I make it about 2 minutes to 12. So thank you very much for your time and your participation. I'm going to stay online for a few minutes. So if anyone has any questions, if anyone has any feedback, I'm happy to take that. And also, I mentioned at the start, if you're prepared to share one thing you're going to do as a result of spending an hour of your important time listening to me, that would be even better. So I'll leave the chat open now just for a minute or two, and happy to sort of take feedback. Yeah, thanks, Roy. Thanks, Toby. Glad you found it useful. That's good. As I said, if anyone's prepared to share an action, that would be good as well. As I say, at the end of the day, if you sit here and listen to me for an hour, thanks for doing that. But I want you to take something away that you're going to do as a result of doing it. Maybe you're thinking, okay, I ought to get a social value policy in place. It doesn't have to be a 10-pager. You'll find stuff online. So it can be a 1-pager. Oh, perhaps you ought to sort of get some updated case studies. It doesn't have to be rocket science. Perhaps you're just going to review the notes or review the webinar. Yeah, thanks, Roddy. Yeah, or register on the Delta resourcing site. That's another one to do. So thanks for that. Right. Well, I'm glad you found it useful, helpful. As I say, if you want to sort of review anything, then do check the YouTube channel. And yeah, thank you again for your participation in time, and I'll hopefully see all of you on the session next week.